Alright, so this video is going to come off as something of a ramble, I'm sure. I've been trying to script it all day, and I just can't. I mean, that's not entirely true. I can, technically speaking, but every time I do, it just comes off as artificial, manufactured, and that's not what I want this video to feel like. Because as much as I love Pokemon overall, it's the video games that bring the most joy to my life out of any aspect of this franchise. And the My 2 Cents series is supposed to be about my take on things, my takeaway from things, my feelings on things. So I don't want this to feel like an analysis. I want this to feel like, kind of like my Over the Garden Wall video did, where while I was being critical of the source material, the main point of that video was to get across my feelings about it. And I certainly hope that comes across, because I'm kind of winging this. I don't know how it's going to go. The reason I waited to talk about the video games last out of everything Pokemon that I'm going to be talking about, at least for now, is not just because the games are what's most important to me, but it's because I feel like the games are definitely what's most important to the franchise. It started out as a video game franchise, and while I don't know the numbers offhand, I'm willing to bet real money that if the anime went away, and the toy line went away, and even the card game went away, if Pokemon just became a video game franchise, it may not thrive the way that it thrives now, but it would survive. Because the games are good, they're fun, and people still enjoy them. The same people who enjoyed the first games still enjoy the new ones today. Obviously, that's not universally true. Obviously, people's experiences differ from one person to the next, but it is true of at least some people. And considering that Pokemon is a franchise aimed at younger people, and considering just how old those games are, those original games are, and how different they are from the new ones, despite what some people would have you believe, that's saying something. Not everyone who is a fan of the original Nintendo and Super Nintendo era Final Fantasy games are going to enjoy modern Final Fantasy games. And the reverse is true too. Not everyone who likes a modern Final Fantasy game is going to be able to go back to an early one and enjoy it. But you do see quite a few younger Pokemon fans going back to the older games, to the first games, and still getting a lot out of them. And a lot of that harkens back to some of the stuff I talked about in my concept video. Pokemon as a concept is a franchise which tugs at your nostalgia strings and stimulates longing in people's minds. Playing one of the Pokemon games brings to mind the kinds of fantasies, of adventures that kids might have daydreaming in school. None of the Pokemon games are super complicated. They never have been. And the first game, despite seeming like a cobbled together pile of half-working code, despite the fact that it was actually pretty genius in the way that it fit all of its information onto that weak and inefficient original Game Boy cartridge, is a mess of a game. There are bugs out the butt. But for some reason, and this has always been the case with the Pokemon games, the bugs feel like part of the experience. I remember the Missing No glitch and the Catching Mew glitch, and they felt like part of the game, even though they're not. They're not supposed to be, at least. But the Pokemon world is presented as this universe full of adventure, full of possibilities, full of mysteries that you're never going to be able to experience all of. That learning that there's this mysterious jumble ball of pixels living off the coast of some island somewhere that you can only reach by doing some nonsensical sequence of events. Or learning that you can catch the mythical Pokemon Mew by likewise carrying out a nonsensical sequence of events. They make sense. They make sense in the context of this world because they're just new mysteries, new aspects of this world to explore. I remember in the lead up to the Gold and Silver version game's release, back when the internet was an itty bitty baby and nobody really knew what to do with it yet, how much I relished absorbing every tiny bit of even potentially spoilerific content on these new upcoming games. Pokemon Gold and Silver promised to be the first Pokemon games that I played, or at least one or the other of them did. It was something that we had talked about in my family for months. Once the games came out, I was supposed to get one or the other of them for Christmas. I ended up with Gold version, and while everything that I saw on the internet didn't end up being in the game, I still loved it. And part of that was because I ended up searching for those things that I had seen online that didn't end up being there, and even though I didn't end up finding them, the search was still fun, and it still felt like part of the game, if that makes any sense. You're playing as this character who goes out exploring this world and learning about its contents to help further knowledge of the world. So if I go out searching for something and it doesn't turn out to be there, I'm still doing what I'm supposed to be doing in the game. I'm still furthering my knowledge of this world and this universe. There were rumors that got spread around the schoolyard for the first generation games. There was the rumor that Mew was hidden under a truck hidden off screen. There was another rumor that went around my school, and I don't know how prevalent this was in general, but there was a rumor that if you left a grass Pokemon and a water Pokemon at the daycare outside of Goldenrod City in Pokemon Gold or Silver version, you walked a certain number of steps around the city and made it back within a certain number of steps. Even though the two Pokemon would not produce an egg together normally, if you then walked out behind the daycare center and fished in the little pond behind the building 100 times, a Pokemon would appear that was a fusion of Squirtle and Bulbasaur. It was called Venustoise, and it was based on a fictitious Pokemon, one that doesn't exist, which featured in a very brief scene in the anime. And I will freely admit, I tried this multiple times. And even though I was bummed out that it didn't work, because of course it didn't work. Even though I was bummed out, I still had fun with it. It's still part of the experience, and I look back on it, and I cherish it. In fact, I cherish everything from that time playing the games. That old gold version cartridge, I still have it. It doesn't work anymore, but I still have it. It's probably for that very reason that the Generation 2 Pokemon designs are still mostly my favorites. When I get nostalgic for a Pokemon game, for the mysteries and the adventure in a Pokemon game, I think back to my time exploring the ruins of Alph, uncovering its hidden chambers and unlocking all of the unknowns so that I could capture every single variety. And I'm not going to claim that this mentality works for everyone, that it's a perfect game development mentality or anything. Obviously, not everyone's going to find this kind of storytelling and world building as appealing as I do. And I'm certainly not going to claim that Pokemon games are flawless, because they're definitely not. The first generation games, like I said before, had bugs out the butt. Fundamental aspects of the gameplay were broken upon release. You'll often hear people say that Pokemon games haven't changed, and it's true that the core mechanics of Pokemon games haven't really changed since the originals, but that's because the concept doesn't need to drastically change to remain enjoyable. I don't want the core mechanics of the games to change, I just want the world building and the storytelling to keep getting better. Now, there are certainly aspects of Pokemon games that I don't like. I don't like how some of the games have sections that artificially ramp up the difficulty, where suddenly you might come to a boss battle where the character you're supposed to defeat is just so much stronger than the last guy that you fought that there's no way that you were intended to progress naturally from that last fight to this current one. The most recent games, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, did something like this when you fight an alternate universe version of the original Team Rocket boss, Giovanni. I don't like how some games will have a section where, as an example, just pulling this out of my butt, where all of the landscape looks pretty much the same, so there's not even anything interesting to look at, and yet your character is slowed down substantially by the snow mechanics, so you can't just rush through it either, and it's super boring. Wonder where I got that idea from. Anything like that, which is clearly just there to fill out the game and make it seem even longer than it actually is, I don't like, and Pokemon games do have a tendency to have sections like that in them. All the way back to the original games with the Rock Tunnel, which you could only traverse comfortably if you taught your Pokemon an absolutely useless move that you couldn't remove from it later, and if you carried a bunch of repels with you to avoid all of the annoying Zubat encounters. It was a filler section, and I hate it. So much so that when I go back to play one of the originals or one of the remakes of the originals, I've taught myself to be able to navigate Rock Tunnel pretty much with my eyes closed so that I don't even have to think about it. And I promise you that that is the only part of that game where that's true. That is the only part of that game where I don't want to think about it. I've been involved in some way with Pokemon as a media phenomenon pretty much since it came to the United States. I used to watch the anime, I still play the card game. I play online occasionally on the Pokemon TCG Online desktop app, which is available for free if anyone's interested. I was super interested in the, Pokemon Evolutions or something? Set that was released recently where it basically just updated a bunch of the old cards. In fact, I still have a deck here that kind of takes a bunch of those cards and puts them together into a pretty functional deck. It's really outdated now, you couldn't play it in standard format anymore, but it is mostly made up of cards from that Evolution set, and it's a little slower than some other competitive decks might be, but it's certainly functional. And I built it simply because I was nostalgic for those old cards. And you know what? I'll probably continue to play the card game and even remain interested in the anime in kind of an ancillary way until the day that either I die or they do. And I'm sure I'll continue to enjoy both of those aspects of my life. But it will be a sad, sad day indeed, at least for me, when the Pokemon video game franchise finally dies. Assuming that it ever does. I don't want to see that day come. It's such a big part of my life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Though, just like at the beginning of this video, I find that I'm actually kind of lying because, you know, as much as I love the games, I really could use $5 billion. Point is, I love the Pokemon games. I feel that despite their flaws, they are the strongest aspect of the Pokemon franchise. They make by far the best use of the Pokemon formula. Better than the anime, better than the Pokemon Adventures manga, better than the card game. Better than the toy line, which basically doesn't even exist for as little as I care about it. I do not foresee a time in my life where I don't play a new Pokemon game that comes out. But at the end of the day, that's been my 2 cents on this topic. As per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of the Pokemon video games? What kind of experiences have you had with them in the past? What do they mean to you? Even if they don't mean anything, I'd still like to hear about it. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below or over on my Discord. Link in the description. Either way though, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later.